What up, party people? What up, boys and girls? This is Chef, New Zealand Murder History Podcast. And I got a pretty interesting historical show for you guys today. I hope you like it. The show's not suitable for children. Kids, click off. Anyone watching who's having a bad day or who's ever been the victim of a hate crime, also click off and seek support from your doctor or one of the many 800 numbers available. My show is just for educational purposes. I'm making this show for the internet. So I'm going to source reference a couple of things here. I'm not doing a whole scripted podcast about this bloke, Lionel Terry. I'm just going to read a couple of articles to you guys because I find it interesting. There is a biography written about him, apparently, but I haven't read it. Anyway, what I have read is www.terra.govt.nz. So you go www.teara.govt.nz, and there's story Terry Edward Lionel by Frank Todd. Yeah, so so the name of the story is Terry Edward Lionel, but this bloke went as Lionel Terry, was what people called him. Anyway, I've got another article here. Let me just show you guys this one. Now, this article is called A White Supremacist, but if you go to look it up online, it's on the stuff.co.nz one, and it's called What We Can Learn from a White Supremacist. But I think the article in this paper was just called A White Supremacist. See, I've lost part of the article, so it just says a white, and then we don't have the second page here that goes with this. But what we're reading here is the press. And yeah, like I said, online you can look up what you can learn from a white supremacist, and it comes up. What we can learn, sorry. Anyway, Christchurch Press, Thursday, 26th of May, 2022. And I'm going to read this part we've got here shortly. And then the third article I used was Racist Killing in Wellington's Hanning Street, 24th of September, 1905. So that's when the murder took place. So the article itself, I don't have a date for when the article was written, but it's on www.nzhistory.govt.nz, yeah, website. All right, so let's have a read here. First of all, I'll just pop this up here for a moment. Let's try to figure out who this guy was, in brief, anyway. So this is the first article that I just referenced. I'm going to read what I wrote down from that article, the one by Frank Todd. So he worked as a cop in South Africa for a short period of time there. He would end up serving a lot of time in Littleton Jail, that's in Christchurch District, and also Seacliffs and Sunnyside, which was a notorious mental asylum where, I don't know, things were really bad. I'm not really sure. I don't know much about it, but it's definitely not a good word, put it that way. So Lionel Terry was born in a place called Sandwich, Kent. I bet they make good sandwiches over there. Anyway, and that was in England on the 6th of Jan in 1873. His dad claimed that they were descendants of Napoleon, but nobody's really sure about that. He established a real estate firm in Pall Mall, London, and was considered a smart businessman. Now, some sources say that he committed this murder because he was trying to promote his book. Yeah, now that sounds ridiculous, but yeah, anyway, his book was called The Shadow. And basically this bloke, Lionel Terry, he walked 900 miles from Maunganui, and that's the one in Northland, so not Mount Maunganui in the Bay of Plenty, all the way at the top of the North Island, Maunganui. Anyway, he walked from there to Wellington City, talking about the Yellow Peril, which is what he called Chinaman. And he arrived in Wellington on the 14th of September 1905, and he tries to convince the House of Representatives that all non-European immigration should be stopped. So yeah, that was Lionel Terry's racist agenda in his racist book, The Shadow. So who was Joe Kum Young? Well, like I said before, he was an old man. He was a Chinese gold miner, coal miner. He actually got injured on the west coast in an accident. And yeah, obviously that wasn't great. So the local Chinese community in Greymouth, they wanted to pay some money to send him back home to China, where he had relatives that would look after him well. But he didn't want to leave New Zealand. He liked it here. He thought this place was cool. So he went up to Wellington, but unfortunately, because he was injured from the accident and he was quite old, he was unable to work, and he ended up falling on hard times. I've read in one article, not the one I've got here, but another article, that he was homeless for a while. So, you know, things weren't going super great. Well, they weren't exactly going according to plan, but, you know, he wanted to stay in New Zealand, and, well, it didn't work out for him. Check this out. The murder of retired miner Joe Kum Young in Wellington's Hanning Street highlighted the hatred some felt towards New Zealand's small but long-established Chinese community. His killer, a white supremacist named Lionel Terry, who had recently arrived in the country, committed the brutal crime to promote his crusade to rid New Zealand of non-European immigrants. Born in Punyu County in Canton, China, Joe Kum Young had arrived in New Zealand about 25 years earlier after spending several years mining in Victoria, Australia. An accident on the west coast where he was pursuing a gold mining claim left him with a broken leg. No longer able to work and now elderly, he had the opportunity to return to China after the local Chinese community raised enough money for his fare. Instead, he decided to move to Hanning Street in Wellington, the centre of the capital's Chinese community. On the night of the 24th of September 1905, Joe Kum Young was walking along Hanning Street when he was shot from behind by Terry. He was rushed to the hospital but soon died after. Terry surrendered to police the next morning. The case went to trial in November. He conducted his own defence. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. Despite Terry's own resistance to suggestions, he suffered from mental illness. He was sentenced to a life imprisonment on the grounds of insanity. Later diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, Terry spent the rest of his life in Littleton Prison and Sunnyside and Seacliff mental hospitals. He died in 1952, so he's one of our longest-serving prisoners ever. He served, that's a lot of years, that's like 47 years or something in prison. That's insane. From 1905, you know, because he got caught the next day. Anyway, back to, I'll just read the last of this article. In the community on the site of the shooting in Hanning Street, in 2006, a memorial plaque to Joe Kum Young was unveiled by the Wellington Chinese community on the site of the shooting in Hanning Street. This event included lighting of incense and a traditional ceremony to honour his spirit. Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, so they put this this plaque there in Hanning Street. So, you know, you sort of think of New Zealand white power and you think of sort of skinhead looking guys and, I don't know, swastika tattoos and that, but, you know, look at this guy. He's, yeah. He shot an elderly Chinaman with a limp. As far as I know, who was unarmed. It's like the most cowardly victim profiling ever. Alright, let's have a read of this one. The journal of racist murderer Lionel Terry has been kept in Vicky Brown's family for generations. Its contents, shared for the first time, shows parallels with the modern alt-right movement. Eda Tang reports. Alright, let's have a read of this one. Mad as a hatter. That's how Vicky Brown describes... I might just set this up here, actually. Just put this up here for a moment. That's how Vicky Brown describes the man behind a journal, which has been in her family's possession for 3 generations. She's talking about white supremacist Lionel Terry, who murdered Joe Kum Young, an elderly Chinese man in Wellington in 2005. It was a hate crime committed by a man so obsessed with racial purity he even wrote a book about it. Brown lives in Lincoln near Christchurch, and she keeps Terry's journal in her kitchen cupboard. This album was given to me by my grandfather, Bertram Spears? Anyway, a nurse he dated who cared for Mr. Terry in Seacliffs, she says. So a nurse who cared for Lionel Terry in Seacliffs for some reason ended up with his journal and gave it to this lady's grandfather. That's what she's saying. Anyway, before Brown's father, Colin Spears, died, I think it's Spires. Anyway, he wanted it to go somewhere where it would be available for people to see. The album contains meticulously penned poems and illustrations. Some poems are older and reproduced, and some have never been seen by the public before. Bruce Mahalski, who runs the Dunedin Museum of Natural Mysteries, opened several copies of Terry's letters and prose. The work is definitely 100% by Lionel Terry. His text is very neat, angular, and quite florid, with a lot of embellishments. He also writes a lot about the same subjects: the unjustness of his captivity, his obsession with not interbreeding with other races, his preoccupation about only eating certain locally grown foods, his disagreement with the administration and some of the hospital staff. Each page of the album was signed. He was a very narcissistic and opinionated man and an egomaniac, Mahalski says. He was prepared to murder an innocent man and face execution himself to promote his xenophobic booklet about keeping New Zealand racially pure. On September 24th, 1905, Terry shot Joe Kum Young in the head in Hanning Street in central Wellington's Chinese community. He turned himself into police. So this is the next day after the shooting. He went to the police, handed himself in. He gave them the gun. It doesn't say that in the paper, but he does. He gave them his gun, and he handed them over a copy of his book, The Shadow, and said, "I have nothing more to say except that my action was right and justifiable." At the time, there was no alternative to being hanged for someone found guilty of murder in New Zealand. However, Terry was deemed insane and morally irresponsible for the crime he committed. He was institutionalized at Littleton Prison, then Sunnyside Hospital in Christchurch, then died in Seacliff Asylum, where he wrote the journal. Alright, well, I guess that's enough. It's sort of keeps going. That's, yeah, kind of interesting, really. It's pretty strange. So let's have another look at this guy. Yeah, so this guy's promoting racial purity in New Zealand. He's going around handing out his book, and he goes and talks to the House of Representatives. See, a lot of this stuff is like olden days stuff. Like, I don't think New Zealand has a House of Representatives anymore. I might be wrong. I don't even really know what that is. Sounds more like something they have in Washington, D.C., you know? But a lot of this old, you know, just the way they say things back in the day. I mean, this is over 100 years old, all this happened. Yeah, 117 years ago, even. And then this bloke, yeah, Lionel Terry, ends up being a paranoid schizophrenic. Well, getting diagnosed, I guess. He was always a paranoid schizophrenic. And then he, yeah, that one's Seacliffs, the one that he ended up in at the end. That's a really bad place as well. They had a big fire there a long time ago, and I don't really know much about it, but a lot of people died, like a lot of the patients. I might do a story on it at some point. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, Seacliffs out Dunedin. I'm not sure. I think it might be just north of Dunedin. I don't really know. Yeah, shot the old Chinaman in the middle of Wellington City. Weird, eh? Have a good one, everybody.